An uprising in Egypt because of a young generation powered by Twitter and Facebook. That's what we're being told, but is it really true? And why did this man, a young Egyptian singer, popular across the Middle East, come out in defence of President Mubarak and then apparently apologise? Today, the young generation and the new Egypt. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Sahil Rahman. Social media has been dubbed the new tool for revolutionaries. The seeds were sown in 2009 when Twitter was credited with the protests that followed the Iranian elections. Debate followed the uprising that saw the ousting of Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali early this year as to whether it was the first Twitter revolution. And now in Egypt, the role of social media in mobilising the people has once again come into focus. But with many of the protesters on the ground having little or no access to the internet in Egypt, can social media really be credited with what's happening across the Middle East? Sysomos, a social media intelligence firm, has analysed the number of people using Twitter across the Middle East and North Africa. So let's take a quick look. Twitter has a total of 52 million users. That's the estimate. Almost 15,000 of these are in Egypt, Tunisia and Yemen. That's about 0.027%. And of these, almost 90% are in Egypt. So, with figures like these, social media, is it really a new tool of revolutionaries? Well, joining me to discuss this in Washington, D.C., Courtney Radsch, Freedom of Expression Officer at Freedom House. Ms. Radsch is writing a book on cyber activism in Egypt. Also in Washington, D.C., Mohammad al-Abdallah, Programme Officer at the International Center for Journalists. Also in the US, in Boston, Jillian York, Project Coordinator at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. And joining us here in Doha, Arab-American hip-hop artist Omar Offendum. Omar has been accredited with creating what many are dubbing as the anthem for Egypt's revolution. To all of my guests, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Can I begin with you, Courtney, in Washington, D.C.? Have we got this whole social media thing wrong? I mean, you say in one of your articles on the internet, revolutions don't happen in cyberspace, they happen on the streets. Please explain.
Well, I think that social media has been an important tool that activists have used to help organize, mobilize, and publicize. But I think that more extended view of history, if you can go past 2009 back to 2005, when the judges' demonstrations happened, when you had the April 6th movement in 2008, social media and digital tools like mobile phones and blogs have been essential tools to mobilize people, but it wasn't until you got it out of the digital sphere and to a wider population, and that's through word of mouth. That's through seeing people walk by your door, through your window, on the streets, that we've seen the mass protests that these digital activists have been working for several years. So it's actually not a new thing. It's just that I think much of the media's attention to it is new. Okay,
Jillian York in Boston, certainly from your credentials, you're not so sure about this whole social media thing, are you? And whether you might agree so much with Courtney.
Well, you know, I do agree with what Courtney just said, that social media is a really important tool that has been around for quite a while now and is being used in Egypt. But, you know, what I would say is that the media has sort of portrayed this as if these tools are what caused revolutions, and simply, you know, they're not. If you look at Egypt, there's less than a 25% internet penetration rate, and I think we need to think about that when we go forward and analyze these tools in revolution.
Mohammad al-Abdallah in Washington, D.C., how do you explain the social media justification for perhaps being involved, as some perceive it to be, in what's going on in Egypt and perhaps even in Tunisia?
I strongly disagree on the call it's a Facebook revolution, because it's not a revolution. If you walk in the Tahrir Square today and ask people what's Facebook and Twitter, and most likely to have a very low percentage of people who can correctly recognize what's Facebook and Twitter, and the percentage of the people who have a smartphone will be very low. However, we will be very unfair if we say the Facebook and Twitter did not play a key role in mobilize these people and bring them together. The idea idea I have is the people were unhappy with their government for several reasons, but the social networking has nothing to do with that. The social networking and the social websites, all what it does, or it did, it's to spread the word about the date, the time, the location, about the protest, but not to mobilize, to bring the people or to give them the political motivation for going to the street.
Okay, well, let's get into the nitty-gritty then. I mean, Courtney, if I come back to you, is the media, and I'm talking about newspapers and television here, then giving social media too much credit? You say they have an important role, which we all agree on, but are they getting too much credit for what's really happening? And that if they shouldn't get the credit, who should?
Yes, I definitely think that it's a sexy story to give credit to social media. I was working at al-Arabiya during the 2009 protests in Iran, and all the media loved to credit it to social media. But that is too simplistic. What social media has been important for is that many of the key activists who are playing a central role in organizing and training other activists are using social media in those repertoires of contention. But that doesn't mean that social media is responsible for the revolution. That's the Western media, however, has simplified it, and they don't have a very in-depth understanding of what's going on, and they want to make it a story that, you know, Americans and British and Europeans can find interesting. But I think that we need to put it into perspective and realize that these protests resulted from broad economic discontent, from the inability of college-educated people to find jobs, and just, you know, broad societal problems that would not be solved by, you know, private social networks like Facebook, or, you know, it's a very low threshold of involvement if all you have to do is like a group or follow a Twitterer. You know, it really takes gumption and putting your personal safety at risk to go on the street and face those brutal police. I remember in 2008, on April 6th, there was no one on the streets. People were scared to go out of the streets, and that's why it started as a call for people to stay home. And this is fundamentally different, and I think that's where the true power is being shown, is that people from broad swaths of society are on the streets protesting and demanding their freedoms.
So, Mohammad, from your perspective then, and from what you've been seeing of what's going on in Egypt, how crucial are the social media sites in terms of mobilising and utilising the technology to enthuse the masses?
Actually, I differentiate between the social media role to call people to go to the street and the social media role to cover what's going on and provide information in real time, second by second, and pictures. And if we want to be a little bit fair, just we have to realize that the number of the protesters significantly increased from tens of thousands to millions during the 5 days where the government cut off the internet and disabled the SMS services. And that's another evidence that social media did not bring those people together to the street. Social media played a very, very crucial role, and it was a very powerful and tremendous tool and power to send the information and the news about what's going on now in the street, and the updates, most recent updates about what's going in the protest in Tahrir Square, and but that again, that did not give the people the political motivation. And again, when the Egyptian people called the Egyptian to go to the street to protect the National Museum. They did that during the day when the government cut off the internet, and people heard that call and they went to the street and tried to protect. It's the crowd source, or using the crowd power, is very, very tremendous power, and people are using that in a very effective way to send information and the news, but it did not really, it doesn't really the reason to bring people to the street.
Okay, Jillian, let me bring you in here, because you were nodding to both what Courtney had to say and what Mohammad had to say. I didn't want to interrupt them while they were speaking, but I'd like to hear your point of view.
Sure. Well, you know, I think Courtney touched on this a little bit, but much of the U.S. media in the past couple of weeks has been coming out with headlines like "Social media gives Egyptians a voice," and I find that particularly almost offensive. When you look at what's really happening, it's not giving people a voice. It's certainly allowing them, as Mohammad mentioned, to broadcast what's happening in Tahrir Square and elsewhere, and it's certainly in Tunisia as well. Certainly helped people to get information out of the country during a crucial time. But I think think that a lot of the Western obsession with this is, sort of misguided. I think that, it ignores the reality of what's happening on the ground, the tear gas, the deaths. Social media, isn't what gets people out. And like Mohammad mentioned, when the internet was shut off, a lot more people took to the streets. And I've read a couple of different blogs from within Egypt of people who said, okay, the internet's off now. What else can I do? I'm going to leave the house. And I think that that's something that we should be looking at too. But
Mohammad, can I bring you in here then to what Jillian's just said, is the fact that a lot of Egyptians, the large majority, live on less than $2 a day. Their access to such technology would be limited, and therefore it has to be said, how do the masses, how do they get their information? Because if state television is only running certain types of images and the internet is closed down, somebody's getting the word out.
That's clear. When the government cut off the internet, people start using SMS services to spread the word about what's going on. And when the government disabled the SMS services, people start calling each other, and then eventually, finally, they went to the street to talk to each other. That's another evidence that it's not a social media, it's not Facebook and Twitter, because merely people looking for a way to communicate easily and spread the word about their work. And yesterday, we've seen people talk via the radio more than before, not on social media or Facebook or Twitter. And I agree with Jillian. It's very unfair to say social networking gives people voices in Egypt, because it helped people to cover the story, to bring more information, and because the events is in different locations, and it's very hard to cover those stories. Even credible media and international media organizations relied heavily on those people and take their information. But again, this is it's kind of citizen journalism, but it's most of the people in the same time who's posting this information, they posting this information from activism perspective rather than being a citizen journalism. They're using this information to mobilize, not to cover the story, to encourage people to go to the street, not to deliver the information only.
OK, well, we're talking about social media, and one of the issues that has really ignited Facebook users in the Middle East is the controversy surrounding this man, TAMER HOSNI. He's a popular Egyptian singer in the region. Here's what he told Egyptian television on Tuesday.
Mubarak in power for 30 years. It means he has the experience. He knows how to keep the country going. 30 years of security. He has been able to crush terrorism. Sina and Taba, all these places are now safe. Why should there be a problem when your father sometimes overlooks you? You are many. Sometimes a father gets his own children's name wrong. A father with 3 or 4 kids can make them up. What's the problem? You are 80 million, 90 million people. Things like this will happen.
Well, it's a statement that he later retracted.
I want to die today. I'm not angry with the protesters. They misunderstood that. They told me go and save the country. I thought I was saving the people. I came to tell them I'm not angry with them and that I had misunderstood things.
Well, he's not the only musician to express his political opinion. Arab-American hip-hop artist Omar Offendum is also with us here in Doha. Thanks very much for joining us. You've obviously penned a song which has become unofficially the anthem for what's been going on in Egypt. I mean, why are you getting involved? You're not even Egyptian.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show.
Okay.
I appreciate the introduction, but I respectfully disagree. I can't be credited with creating a song of the revolution. The Egyptian people themselves have been making incredible music in Tahrir Square, in Alexandria, in Suez, just chanting on the streets and coming up with things on the fly to express themselves. And that is the real music of this revolution, in my opinion. What we did was create a song of solidarity with the Egyptian people. A number of artists from the United States and Canada who came together in essence, just to kind of show, like I said, our solidarity and create a dedication to the Egyptian people and their results.
And at what stage then, Omar, at what stage did you decide that you had to get involved?
Well, obviously, you know, this is a relatively recent situation, and so it happened over the past couple of weeks. Put the song together with some artists who are from all over the US and Canada, and so it happened online, you know. basically sending the files that we'd recorded from Montreal, from Philadelphia, from Atlanta to our studio in Los Angeles and recording and mixing it and then putting it out online. And subsequently, it's received over the past 2 days almost 40,000 hits on YouTube.
So can I ask then, because this relates to what Jillian said just a few moments ago, were you influenced by the images you saw on television screens, or were you influenced by tweets or Facebook?
Well, something I said in an interview here on Al Jazeera yesterday was that, I was very much influenced by what I was seeing on Al Jazeera English, which I was watching online, and what I was reading on tweets, but also from what I was hearing from my friends and my family in Egypt who, I've been in contact with and I've been getting stories from directly. And so, all those things, the combination of all those things, and also the history that I have, the understanding of the culture and what was happening there, obviously shapes the way that I view what's happening now.
So Jillian, therefore I come back to you in Boston and what you just said earlier about the fact that we may be giving too much credit to the social networks, but they are a very important tool nonetheless.
Definitely, and I think, what Omar just said, that it was a mix of all of those things, that it was television, it was the photos, the images, the tweets, all of it together is certainly a compelling story and a compelling narrative. And, it's funny because Omar's song has actually been all over my Facebook pages in the past couple of days from people that I didn't even know were paying attention.
Well, let me come then to Courtney, because people have been paying attention, and they paid attention especially in Egypt when the government cut the internet off, and there were very inventive ways of getting round it. How surprised were you by the way people circumvented the problems that they were facing?
I have to say I'm not that surprised at how the people circumvented it. I think that we've seen companies like Facebook and Google are willing to help find workaround solutions, and that the digital activists in Egypt are very good at publicizing information and getting information about how to avoid censorship or bypass that. What I was surprised by was the Egyptian government's decision to completely shut off the internet and mobile phones. That had a huge economic cost associated with it, and frankly, I didn't think that they really had the capacity to do that. But I do want to address this idea that I think we're perhaps, by trying to avoid the utopianism of social media, we're actually not giving enough credit to it in terms of it did help provide a voice to the Egyptian people in a media environment where you have the vast majority of television stations are state-owned. You have newspapers that are state-owned, as well as clearly defined along opposition party lines. Yes, you do have somewhat of an independent media, but ordinary people, and especially young people, have pretty limited access to mainstream media and to presenting their views. So actually blogs and Facebook and Twitter, but especially, blogs and these self-publishing tools have been really important to give Egyptians and especially the youth a voice and to let them bypass the stranglehold of mainstream media on the news agenda. So I don't think we should discount the role.
So, didn't mean to interrupt you there, Courtney. It's just that Mohammad shaking his head in disagreement. I just wanted to know why.
Yeah, I can kind of disagree on that, because the social media did not provide a voice to the Egyptians. It helped them to spread their information and their news in the first place. And the social networking playing a role, it's an important role, of course, but it's merely the role of the secret publication have done during the Soviet era. The nice thing about the social networking, it's easy, friendly, accessible, and it's international, cross-boarding, and it's multilingual, and that's make it very, very friendly user and more benefits. And if we can ask, since the idea is the social networking, why the government did not use the social networking in response in the activities and the protesters? Because it's not the social networking problem, or it's not about social networking. Again, the social networking played a key role. I don't give them any credit or zero credit. Of course, we give them a credit, but it's not give them too much credit, because using the crowdsource again in covering what's going on, and citizen journalism is a very important thing, and it's very tremendous power, but it's not giving the Egyptian the voice.
Jillian, can I bring you in here? Because I just want to pick up from what Mohammad just said about why the government didn't use social networking. They seem to be behind the curve. And what we did see was the Vice President and various other government officials some have described, talk condescendingly to the public, especially to the younger generation, by saying you should go home, you shouldn't be so bad, you should listen to your parents, and actually appealing to parents as well in a very, you might say, old-fashioned way. They really didn't have a handle certainly from a third party looking in.
Well, you know, I mean, I think to what Mohammad said about these tools, I think there's a really good point here about the internet being shut down, which is to say that, you know, these tools being available also allows the government a way to look in on people, to spy on what they're doing. And, you know, we see right now with Syria unblocking Facebook, there's always that risk that, you know, that the government could also be using it to monitor the activities of people online.
Can I ask Courtney the same as well? Sorry, Courtney, I mean, you were listening obviously to that, and I was just wondering how you gauge the way the government reacted and the way that some have described it as talking very condescendingly to the younger generation of Egypt and the demonstrations that we saw.
Well, I think it's par for the course. I mean, I think it's been surprising at how unsophisticated the Egyptian government has been in using any sort of online media. You see very few NDP blogs. You don't see a big presence on Facebook or in Twitter trying to control the debate. So they've pretty much allowed Egyptian civil society and really pro-democracy, anti-Mubarak voices to dominate the blogosphere and the social media realm. So I think that's pretty interesting. Unlike, for example, in Sudan, where you had the government create faux Facebook pages to try to entrap protesters. But I think that the Egyptian government is not going to get anywhere by talking down to these activists, because they have been engaged for several years in trying to bring change to their countries. And social media, it is helping them amplify their voice. It's helping their voice stand out among, you know, the millions of others, and it's helping amplify it to the Western media and to Western politicians, which, let's be clear, it does have an impact on Egypt. You know, as Obama is changing his support for Mubarak and becoming a little bit less convinced, this is going to have an impact. So I don't think we should discount the role that these media have in amplifying the voices of some of these activists.
Well, let me bring Omar Offendum here. You know, you said just a few moments ago, Omar, that, you know, you were speaking to people on the ground, you were speaking to colleagues and friends around the world, and you know the culture. So, I mean, what was the reaction from you when you saw government officials talking in a condescending fashion and using the traditional media outlets to get their message across?
I mean, I wasn't surprised, you know. It was sad to see, but I wasn't surprised at all, you know. And that is just really what I think most people of Egypt probably expected to hear as well, you know, at least the people who were involved in these protests. And just wanted to make a point that it is also sad. I think we briefly talked about TAMER HOSNI earlier, you know. I think the truth is, like, some of the government tactics have worked, and they have kind of created a little bit more fear in some of the people, but the resolve, I'm not a huge fan of his music, I must say, but the resolve of the Egyptian people to push through that is what ultimately is gonna make this happen, I think. Sorry, thank you for not playing that anymore. That was kind of getting really hard to think there for a second. But it's also, just with respect to him, I mean, you know, he's a human being, he's a man, he could make his own decisions. For him to come out and say that really was unfortunate. I don't think that, you know, we should necessarily use violence against him, but at the same time, you know, I don't hold it against the people, you know, for having the opinions that they have about him.
But he's one of many, most probably, that still might feel like that, even though he's retracted that statement now. I mean, we're coming to the end of our programme. Can I come to you, Mohammad, in terms of the way, from an impartial, you know, third-person point of view, I mean, is this a turning point of what we've been seeing in Egypt, and how social media is used? How do you think this is going to progress now? It was once seen as a tool to chat with friends. Now it can actually bring a government down to its knees.
Well, I'm watching very closely. I cannot really predict what's going to happen, but I'm watching via social networking. I don't want to discount them at all. I'll give them the credit. I'm following people from Twitter and Facebook, and following some of the ICFJ trainees who trained on social networking and citizen journalism, and using the skills they learned in our courses to bring the information more. And I don't really give any, I don't want to give any idea how this, I think, gonna end, but I'm following on social networking and then another media what's going to happen.
We shall see how this does develop. I'd like to thank all of my guests in Washington, D.C., Courtney Radsch and Mohammad al-Abdallah, Jillian York in Boston, and Omar Offendum in Doha. Thank you to all my guests on this edition of Inside Story, and thank you for watching. Do email us if you have anything to suggest for future editions at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. Thanks very much for your time and your company. Bye for now.